Before you swipe away, imagine a single old UK 1 penny coin sitting in a drawer worth more than a luxury car, more than years of savings, more than most people earn in a lifetime. This is not a myth, this is real British history hiding in plain sight, and the shocking truth is that some of these pennies were never meant to be spent at all. Today, you are about to discover the top 10 most valuable UK 1 penny coins ever found. Coins surrounded by royal history, mint secrets, ultra-low mintages, and accidental releases. Coins collectors would do almost anything to unwatch closely, because number 1 is one of the rarest coins on Earth.
Have you ever held a coin so common yet so mysterious that it connects the story of an entire empire to the palm of your hand? Today we're diving deep into the world of the 1967 1 penny coin from the United Kingdom. A coin that looks simple, but hides behind it a remarkable tale of post-war Britain economic transformation, royal symbolism, minting secrets, and a legacy that would mark the very end of an era before decimalization changed British money forever. Stay with me as we uncover the untold journey of the 1967 penny, a coin that once jingled in millions of pockets, but now whispers stories from a nation on the brink of change. The story of the 1967 1 penny coin begins in a Britain that was transforming rapidly. The Second World War had ended just over 2 decades earlier, and the nation was still rebuilding its industry's economy, and global identity coins were more than just currency. They were symbols of power, continuity, and trust in the crown. The 1 penny coin of 1967 carried the familiar portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Mary Gillick. This portrait was graceful, young, and hopeful. It reflected a monarch who had ascended to the throne in 1952, representing a new beginning after the long years of wartime hardship. On the reverse side stood Britannia, the ancient symbol of British strength, maritime dominance and resilience, holding her trident and shield, facing the waves with calm authority. The design by Leonard Charles Wyon had been in use since the mid-19th century, appearing first on the pennies of Queen Victoria in 1860 and surviving unchanged through the reigns of Edward VII, George V, and even the brief years of George VI. The 1967 issue of this coin therefore represented the final great continuation of an iconic design before the modernization of British coinage in 1967. Britain was preparing for decimalization, a complete overhaul of its monetary system that would replace the complex pounds, shillings, and pence with a simplified decimal system. 1 pound would become 100 new pence, and the old penny system would soon disappear altogether. The Royal Mint knew that massive production was needed to maintain currency circulation until the new decimal coins were introduced. Thus, the minting of the 1967 penny became one of the most extensive in British history. Over 650 million pieces were struck, making it one of the most common pre-decimal coins ever produced. But despite that mass production, the 1967 penny holds fascination among collectors because it marks the very end of an era, the final full year that the traditional penny circulated as a standard issue. These coins were struck at the Tower Hill site in London, one of the last major productions before the Royal Mint's relocation to Llantrisant in Wales in 1968. The decision to move the mint reflected not only a technological modernization, but also the broader industrial changes in post-war Britain. New presses were being introduced, the country was digitizing its records, and the coinage system was evolving. The 1967 penny was produced in bronze, an alloy of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, giving it that deep reddish tone which darkens beautifully over time. These coins weigh 9.4 grams and have a diameter of 30.8 millimeters. They were heavy coins by modern standards, solid in the hand and built to last. The obverse side, bearing the inscription Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina F.D., meaning Elizabeth II by the grace of God, Queen Defender of the Faith, represented the continuity of British monarchy and faith even as the world around was changing rapidly. Collectors often note that although millions of these coins exist, most circulated examples show significant, where the soft bronze metal easily picks up scratches, dents, and discoloration. However, finding uncirculated or proof-like examples is still highly sought after, and many were included in the 1967 proof sets issued by the Royal Mint. These proof coins were struck with polished dies, giving them a mirror finish and sharp detail, making them favorites among numismatists worldwide. The interesting twist in this story is that even though the 1967 penny was officially the last year of production, with the date 1967, no coins dated 1968 or 1969 were issued for circulation. Yet some pennies with the 1967 date continued to be struck later, just to meet demand. This has led to debates among experts about whether all 1967 pennies truly belong to the same minting year, or if some were quietly produced later under the same date to prevent public confusion. The penny of 1967 represents more than metal and design. It captures the social mood of a nation on the threshold of transformation. Britain, in the late 60s, was witnessing dramatic cultural shifts. Music was evolving, the Beatles were changing pop culture, fashion was breaking norms, and technology was starting to redefine industries. While in the background, old symbols like Britannia and the bronze penny quietly slipped into history by 1971 when decimalization finally came. The one new penny was much smaller, lighter, and different in composition. The majestic figure of Britannia still appeared, but the feel, the weight, and the aura of the old penny were gone forever. Many people hoarded the 1967 penny not for its monetary value, but as a nostalgic keepsake of a system they had grown up with, a small piece of their daily lives that connected generations before them to their present moment. When we talk about the 1967 penny in today's collecting world, its value varies based on condition, circulation, and rarity. While common circulated coins may be worth only a small amount, uncirculated or proof versions can fetch higher prices depending on quality and presentation. But what makes this coin truly significant is not its price. It's the narrative it carries. This coin represents the twilight of pre-decimal Britain, an artifact of craftsmanship, design, and national identity, one that bridges Queen Victoria's era of imperial pride with the modern monarchy of Queen Elizabeth II. Numismatists often describe the 1967 penny as the perfect coin for beginners to start collecting because it embodies beauty, history, and accessibility, all in one. The portrait by Mary Gillick deserves special attention. It was based on classical sculpture and avoided the crown showing the queen with a wreath of laurel symbolizing victory and peace. This made it feel both modern and timeless. The image conveyed youth optimism and continuity after a decade of global recovery from war. The choice to retain Britannia on the reverse also reflected national pride. She had been the personification of Britain for over 2,000 years. And even as the world moved toward globalization, the symbol of Britannia stood firm, representing courage and unity among changing tides. The Royal Mint at the time operated with remarkable precision. Each die was hand-prepared with meticulous craftsmanship. Minting errors were rare. But when they did occur, such as weak strikes off center coins or die cracks, those error coins became instant collector items, adding another layer of intrigue to the 1967 penny legacy. As we journey deeper into its story, we see how this coin is not just about value, but symbolism. The 1967 penny was the coin of ordinary people used in shops, post offices, and transport systems. It passed through millions of hands and carried the fingerprints of an entire nation. Its weight, its texture, and its design all remind us of a time when coins were tangible connections to the state, to trust, and to identity. Today, as we look back over half a century later, the 1967 penny stands as both a relic and a storyteller from a Britain that once ruled half the world to a country redefining its place in the modern era. This coin quietly witnessed that transformation. In conclusion, the 1967 one-penny coin is more than just the last of its line. It is a symbol of British endurance, artistry, and history. It connects people from across generations and carries within its bronze surface the story of transition from empire to modernity, from tradition to change, from heavy metal currency to light decimal coins. Every mark on its surface tells a tale, and every preserved piece keeps the spirit of mid-20th century Britain alive. So when you hold a 1967 penny, you are not just holding a coin, you are holding the final heartbeat of an age. Have you ever held a coin that silently tells the story of a fading empire, the rise of modern Britain, and the final breath of an era that defined generations? The 1965 UK one-penny coin may look simple, copper brown, and ordinary to the casual eye. But within its metal lies the legacy of centuries of British monarchy, the echoes of Queen Elizabeth II's early reign, and the final chapters of the great pre-decimal system that once powered the might of the United Kingdom. Today we dive deep into the history that most collectors never fully explore, the story of the 1 penny coin of 1965, the last of its kind before change swept through Britain and the face of its currency was transformed forever. This is not just a coin. This is a time capsule, and by the end of this video, you will see how a small piece of copper became a symbol of identity, power, and transformation. So, sit back and get ready as we uncover the untold story of the 1965 UK 1 penny coin. To understand the 1965 UK 1 penny coin, we must first travel back to the roots of Britain's coinage, a story that stretches over 1,000 years when pennies were first struck in the late Anglo-Saxon era. Around the time of Offa's silver pennies, these coins represented more than value. They were instruments of authority stamped with the image of kingship and unity. Through the centuries, the penny evolved from silver to copper and eventually to bronze, reflecting the industrial age and the shifts of power, wealth, and empire. By the time the 20th century dawned, the penny had already been an inseparable part of everyday British life. Now step into 1965, a time when Britain was finding its new identity after the Second World War. Queen Elizabeth II had been on the throne for just over a decade. The economy was modernizing, technology was advancing, and the British Empire had transformed into the Commonwealth. The coinage, too, was on the verge of great change. The old pre-decimal system was beginning to show its age, and soon it would give way to the modern decimal system. But in 1965, no one yet knew that this particular penny would become one of the last of its line. The 1965 penny was minted in large quantities at the Royal Mint. Located then at Tower Hill, London, its composition was 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, giving it that rich reddish hue that collectors admire even today. It measured 81 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.4 grams, a true heavyweight compared to the modern penny. The obverse of the coin featured the youthful portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Mary Gillick. Her effigy without a crown presented a modern yet traditional image symbolizing the fresh spirit of post-war Britain. The inscription read, Elizabeth II, Dei Gratia, Regina, Fidei, Defensatrix, which translates to Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen Defender of the Faith. The reverse of the 1965 penny carried one of the most iconic designs in British numismatic history, the seated Britannia, a symbol of strength, unity, and the maritime power of the nation. Britannia is shown wearing a Corinthian helmet, holding a trident in her left hand and a shield bearing the Union Jack resting beside her. This reverse design by Leonard Charles Wyon had been in use since 1860. When bronze pennies were first introduced under Queen Victoria, the imagery was timeless, representing the pride and continuity of British rule. Now, as we look deeper into the historical context, the 1965 penny stands at a crossroads. It is a coin that represents the final confident phase of the pre-decimal coinage system. Within a few short years, Britain would make the monumental switch to decimalization on February 15, 1971, known as Decimal Day. But in 1965, the conversation was only beginning. The government was forming committees to explore how to modernize the currency system. The penny, though humble, was central to that debate. Its large size and low purchasing power made it impractical in the modern world. Yet people had an emotional attachment to it. Generations had grown up counting and saving pennies in jars, playing with them as children, and using them daily in shops, markets, and pubs. During this period, the British economy was evolving, industries were shifting, and the Royal Mint faced the challenge of meeting production demands while preparing for a major overhaul. The Royal Mint struck tens of millions of 1965 pennies, most destined for circulation. But despite the large mintage, collectors today find certain specimens in pristine, uncirculated condition highly desirable because they represent the last years of traditional coinage before modernization took over. Every detail of this coin tells a story. The lettering, the weight, even the sound it makes when dropped on a hard surface speaks of a bygone time. The copper tone would darken with age and handling, giving each piece its unique patina, a natural fingerprint of history. Many coins from this era were handled daily by ordinary citizens who lived through post-war recovery through the swinging 60s and into the dawn of technological progress. The 1965 penny was never rare in its time, but its significance grew with hindsight when decimalization came in 1971. The old pennies were gradually withdrawn from circulation. They ceased to be legal tender in 1971, but millions had already found their way into private collections drawers and family memory boxes. Today, holding one is like holding a moment in history, a tangible reminder of the Britain that once was before the monetary landscape changed forever. From a design perspective, the 1965 penny marked the continuation of artistic excellence that had defined British coinage for centuries. Mary Gillick's portrait of the Queen remains beloved by collectors. It appeared on coins from 1953 to 1970 and captures the idealism and grace of a young monarch at the height of optimism. Britannia's image on the reverse connects this coin directly to the Victorian and Edwardian legacies, forming a bridge between the old empire and modern Britain. In numismatic circles, the 1965 penny is often studied for its die variations, metal quality, and mint luster. Although there are no known major varieties of this year, experts often analyze the subtle differences in striking sharpness, tone, and wear patterns that distinguish high-grade specimens from circulated ones. Mint condition examples graded by professional services can reach notable values, especially in proof-like states, while circulated examples still carry sentimental and educational worth. To expand on the historical scene, the mid-1960s were transformative years for Britain. The social fabric was shifting, the youth culture was rising, and the influence of the British monarchy remained steady through Queen Elizabeth's poise and modern approach. This coin, minted during such a dynamic era, becomes more than currency. It becomes a cultural artifact, a silent witness to Britain's post-war recovery and to the gradual evolution of its identity on the world stage. As we approach the later years of the 1960s, discussions about decimalization intensified. The Committee of the Decimal Currency Board formed, and plans were laid to phase out coins like the large penny by the end of the decade. This meant that the 1965 issue was among the final full mintage runs before the transition began in earnest. With the smaller new penny coins introduced after 1971, the traditional one-penny design would never return in its bronze heavyweight form, making the 1965 penny a symbolic farewell to the age of Britannia on copper collectors today. Treasure. The 1965 penny, not for its rarity, but for its story. It represents the continuity of British tradition and the end of an era. It bridges the ancient penny of the medieval kings, the Victorian age of empire, and the modern age of industry and innovation. When you hold it, you hold the weight of history, not just in metal but in meaning. So when you look at that modest one penny dated 1965, remember that it is far more than a coin. It is a mirror to Britain's transformation. It speaks of monarchy, art, economy, and identity. It carries the dignity of Britannia and the youth of a queen. It stands as the last breath of a currency system that served a nation for centuries before giving way to the new world of decimalization. And as every collector knows, not every treasure gleams in gold. Sometimes the richest stories are told in copper. The 1965 UK one-penny coin is one of those stories, a timeless piece of history preserved in your palm, a link to the past that continues to speak to the present. Have you ever held a coin so old that it carries the weight of a nation's history in the palm of your hand, one that has passed through the hands of workers, soldiers, kings, and collectors alike, a coin that silently witnessed the rise and fall of empires and the dawn of a new world? Today we unlock the forgotten story behind one of Britain's most fascinating and mysterious coins, the 1938 one penny. A coin that marked the end of an era and the beginning of another. A coin that bridges the reigns of kings and the tides of history. This is not just a coin. This is a chapter of the United Kingdom's legacy, struck in bronze and frozen in time. Stay tuned as we unfold every secret, every design choice, every minting decision, and the incredible journey that made the 1938 one penny more than just a piece of change, but a symbol of transformation. In the heart of 1938, Britain stood at a crossroads of destiny. The storm clouds of war were gathering across Europe, and the world was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Within this atmosphere of tension, industry, and imperial pride, the Royal Mint continued one of its most time-honored traditions, striking coins that represented the strength, stability, and sovereignty Of the British Empire, among these, the humble 1 penny stood as a powerful symbol of everyday life. It was the coin that connected every class of society, from the factory worker to the royal family. It bought the morning paper, paid for the tram, ride, or a loaf of bread, and yet the 1938 1 penny carries far more significance than its face value suggests. The 1938 1 penny was the last of its kind to be minted before the outbreak of the Second World War, and one of the final issues to bear. The proud portrait of King George VI before wartime production halted regular coinage. The coin's design was steeped in history, blending artistic elegance with national symbolism. Its obverse side bore the dignified image of King George, designed by Thomas Humphrey Paget, who captured the monarch's calm strength and sense of duty. Paget's initials HP can be found subtly beneath the king's neck, a small signature marking one of the most respected engravers of his time, the eye. Inscription surrounding the portrait reads, Georgiv 6, D, GBR, Omen Rex FD and Imp, which translates to George VI by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith Emperor of India. This title reflects Britain's global influence, at the time when the sun truly never set on the British Empire. Turning to the reverse side, the coin proudly displayed Britannia, the female embodiment of Great Britain, seated on a rock trident in one hand and shield in the other, gazing confidently toward the sea. This design had been used for over 2 centuries, symbolizing naval dominance and national pride. The design was originally created by Leonard Charles Wyon and had become an enduring icon of British coinage by 1938. Britannia represented not only the might of the empire, but also the perseverance of the people through economic hardship and looming war. The 1938 penny was struck in bronze, a metal alloy consisting of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, giving it a rich, reddish-brown tone that deepened with age and circulation. The coin had a diameter of 81 millimeters, and weighed 9.4 grams, making it one of the larger and heavier coins of the pre-decimal era. It was minted at the Tower Hill facility in London, the headquarters of the Royal Mint, before its eventual relocation to Llantrisant, Wales, decades later. While the 1938 penny appears in large numbers in records, its story is not one of rarity, but of transition. The late 1930s were years of change and uncertainty, and the Royal Mint's operations reflected this. The total mintage for circulation in 1938 was approximately 50 million pieces, but many of these coins were later withdrawn or melted down during the war effort, as metals became essential for weapons and machinery production. As a result, finding a well-preserved 1938 penny today, especially one with full original luster, is far more difficult than its mintage figures suggest. Collectors often note subtle variations between circulation strikes and proof coins produced for presentation sets. The proof version of the 1938 penny is particularly admired for its deep mirror finish and sharp detail. These proof coins were never intended for everyday use, but for collectors and officials of the realm. They represent the finest craftsmanship of the Royal Mint. During the pre-war years, the cultural and economic context of 1938 adds even greater depth to this coin's story. Britain was recovering from the Great Depression and preparing for the possibility of another world conflict. King George VI himself was still solidifying his position as monarch following the abdication crisis of his brother Edward VIII. Just 2 years earlier, the nation looked to him as a symbol of stability and moral strength. The 1 penny coins of his early reign thus carried not only economic value, but also psychological reassurance. They were tangible reminders of continuity in a time of uncertainty. The 1938 1 penny also stands as a relic of the pre-decimal currency system, a system that had remained unchanged for centuries. 12 pennies made a shilling, and 20 shillings made a pound. Understanding this old system gives modern collectors a glimpse into the daily lives and transactions of ordinary Britons before decimalization in 1971 forever changed. The face of British money, each penny held real purchasing power and emotional significance. People saved them in jars, passed them down to children, and used them as tokens of luck. The sound of the heavy bronze penny dropping into a till was a sound of familiarity across the kingdom. From a numismatic perspective, the 1938 penny marks a pivotal moment between tradition and modernization. It would be the last penny struck before the outbreak of the Second World War disrupted normal coin production. From 1939 through 1945, very few pennies were issued. The war years saw the Royal Mint focusing on producing medals for bravery and tokens for colonies rather than regular currency. This makes the 1938 penny a snapshot of peacetime Britain on the brink of global turmoil. When the war ended, the nation that resumed minting in the late 1940s was not the same one that had struck the 1938 coins. The empire had begun to wane, and the role of Britannia herself would soon fade from coinage when studying. The surviving 1938 pennies collectors look for details that indicate condition and rarity coins graded as mint state. Especially those certified by professional grading services, such as PCGS or NGC, can reach significant values depending on luster. Strike quality and preservation proof specimens in top condition are prized museum pieces representing one of the last artistic expressions of classic British coinage before modern designs took over. But beyond value, the 1938 penny tells a human story. It passed through countless hands during years of hope, fear, and change. It may have sat in the pocket of a London dockworker or a schoolchild in Birmingham. It could have been dropped on the streets of Glasgow or used to buy sweets in a small shop in Wales. Each coin carries traces of that life, the marks of time that speak louder than any engraving today. Collectors and historians view the 1938 one penny not just as a numismatic object, but as a bridge to the past, a reminder of Britain's resilience, its artistry, and its legacy of craftsmanship in metal, from the design table of Humphrey Paget to the furnaces of the Royal Mint. Every 1938 penny embodies a moment when Britain stood proud, facing an uncertain world with dignity and determination. And that is why this small coin deserves a big story, a story of art, empire, identity, and endurance. The 1938 one penny remains a timeless witness to a nation on the edge of history, and to those who hold it today, it still whispers the same message it carried over 8 decades ago: strength, unity, and the enduring power of heritage. Have you ever held a small copper coin and wondered if it could unlock the secrets of an entire empire? Today, we step back into one of the most defining years in British history, the year 1937, the year when a single penny changed the face of a nation and became the silent witness to the dawn of a new royal era. This is not just a coin. This is a piece of living history, a symbol of transition from the solemn end of one reign to the powerful beginning of another. So buckle up as we dive deep into the incredible untold story of the 1937 UK penny. The 1937 one penny coin of the United Kingdom represents a turning point in both numismatic and royal history. It stands at the crossroads between the twilight of the British Empire and the fresh dawn of a modern monarchy. Its design, craftsmanship, and historical backdrop all come together to form a tale that captures the essence of Britain during one of its most fascinating decades. As the world moved into the late 1930s, tension was rising across Europe, but within the United Kingdom, a new hope had emerged. King George VI had ascended the throne after the dramatic abdication of his brother, King Edward VIII, in 1936. The abdication crisis had shaken the monarchy to its core. And when George VI took the crown, the nation needed reassurance, stability, and symbols of continuity. That is where the 1937 penny enters history, not as just another coin, but as a statement of endurance, a coin that quietly proclaimed the strength of the crown and the steadfast spirit of Britain. The Royal Mint, located at Tower Hill in London, was tasked with producing a new series of coins to mark the beginning of George VI's reign. The designs were revised to feature the new monarch, and among them, the penny stood out as one of the most circulated and symbolic pieces. The engraver was Thomas Humphrey Paget, one of Britain's most skilled medallic artists. His initials HP can be seen beneath the king's neck on the obverse of the coin. Paget's portrait of King George VI was dignified and straightforward, without the crown, a deliberate choice to represent humility and service in contrast to royal grandeur. It symbolized the character of a king who never expected to rule, but accepted the burden of leadership with unwavering duty. The reverse of the coin retained the iconic image of Britannia, seated holding a trident, and shield, a design that had adorned British pennies since 1797. This continuity was no coincidence. After the turbulence of the abdication, the British people needed a reminder of their nation's long-standing traditions. Britannia, with her calm presence and maritime power, represented both stability and the imperial strength that defined Britain. At the time, the inscriptions read, Gorgivsius DGBR OMN Rex FD and Imp, meaning George VI, by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, defender of the faith Emperor of India. The phrase Emperor of India carried enormous weight in 1937 as the British Empire was still vast, spanning from Africa to Asia, though whispers of independence were already rising in places like India. This inscription marked the last generation of coins to carry the imperial title before it would vanish after. Indian independence in 1947. In technical terms, the 1937 penny was made of bronze composed of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. It measured 38 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.45 grams. The Royal Mint struck millions of these coins intended for circulation, though in pristine condition they remain valuable to collectors, especially those marked as proof issues for the coronation. Year proofs were specially polished and struck multiple times to achieve a mirror-like surface. These were often presented in coronation proof sets, a limited issue that today fetches high prices among numismatists. The 1937 penny was the first of its kind under George VI, and its mintage reflected a sense of optimism. Britain was modernizing, the economy was slowly recovering from the Great Depression, and industry was picking up again, but clouds were already gathering over Europe. The rise of Nazi Germany and the growing tension between major powers made 1937 one of those deceptively calm years before the storm coins like the 1937 penny circulated among people who could not yet imagine the global conflict that would erupt just 2 years later. This coin was in the pockets of soldiers who would go on to fight in World War II, factory workers who kept the home front running, and children who used it to buy sweets on the corner shop. It became part of the rhythm of British life. When looking closely at a genuine 1937 penny, you'll notice the smooth rim, the crisp edges of Britannia's shield, and the fine detailing of the king's hair and neckline. These were signs of the mint's quality in striking a new reign. Collectors often note that early strikes from 1937 exhibit remarkable clarity compared to later wartime issues when metal shortages and production pressure reduced overall quality. As Britain entered the war in 1939, the minting of coins was affected dramatically, but the 1937 issue remains a symbol of pre-war craftsmanship and royal renewal. Interestingly, there was never a 1937 penny struck for Edward VIII. Although a few pattern coins were created during his brief reign, they never entered circulation, and are today among the rarest and most valuable coins in British history. That makes the 1937 George VI penny even more historically significant, as it became the first coin of a new monarch following one of the most scandalous moments in royal history. Over the decades, the 1937 penny has captured the attention of coin historians, not just for its design, but for its timing. It marked the beginning of the end for the long-running Britannia reverse, which would finally be replaced in 1971. When the UK adopted decimal currency, the penny we hold from 1937 therefore represents both continuity and change, the old and the new. It reminds us that coins are not mere currency, but storytelling devices, tiny monuments to eras of change. Every mark, edge, and engraving carries the weight of its time. In the post-war years, many 1937 pennies continued to circulate through the 1940s and 1950s until the pre-decimal system was phased out. Collectors began saving them for their regal portrait and their connection to the coronation year, and even today, when you hold a 1937 penny, you hold a piece of that history, the pride of an empire, the hope of a nation, and the dignity of a reluctant king. As you look at this small bronze piece, imagine the world it witnessed: the changing skyline of London, the echo of speeches from Winston Churchill, the courage of everyday citizens during the Blitz, the gradual transformation of Britain into a modern democracy, and through it all, this coin passed from hand to hand, silently preserving the spirit of an era long gone. Have you ever held a coin that marks the very edge of a royal era, a single year standing between the end of one of Britain's longest reigns and the dawn of a new monarchy? The 1936 one penny is not just an ordinary copper coin, it is a witness to the final days of King George V, a coin struck at a time when the world was changing faster than ever before. In this video, we are diving deep into the extraordinary history behind the 1936 UK penny, a coin whose story is wrapped in royal transitions, minting secrets, and global significance. The 1936 penny might look small, but it holds within it a story of power-loss tradition and the unbroken line of British sovereignty that spans centuries. The year was 1936, and the British Empire stood vast and powerful, covering nearly a quarter of the Earth's land and people. At its center was King George V, a monarch who had ruled since 1910, guiding his nation through the Great War and the rapid modernization of the early 20th century. The 1 penny coin bearing his image was a familiar sight across the empire, from the streets of London to the ports of Bombay and the outposts of Africa. The penny of 1936 was struck at the Royal Mint in London, continuing a tradition that dated back centuries. The coin was made of bronze, an alloy of copper, tin, and zinc, weighing 945 grams with a diameter of 38 millimeters. It featured the famous seated Britannia on the reverse, a proud symbol of Britain's maritime power and empire, and on the obverse the dignified portrait of King George V, designed by Bertram McKennell. But the 1936 penny is more than metal and mint marks. It is a coin that stands as a silent witness to one of the most dramatic years in royal history. For in that very year, Britain would see not one but 3 kings. In January 1936, King George V passed away after 25 years on the throne. His death marked the end of an era that had seen the world change from horse-drawn carriages to motor cars, from telegraphs to radios, from the peace of Edwardian days to the chaos of the First World War. The coinage bearing his image suddenly became a memorial to the monarch who had guided his people through those turbulent times. After George V came Edward VIII, a modern and charismatic figure who sought to bring change to the monarchy. His reign, however, would last less than a year, and his decision to abdicate for love would become one of the most controversial events in British royal history. What makes this moment so important for coin collectors is that no official British pennies with Edward VIII's portrait were released for circulation. Though patterns and trial pieces were made, none ever reached the public, which means the 1936 penny became the final circulating penny of George V's era and the last official penny before the monarchy entered turmoil. The coins minted in 1936 were therefore produced early in the year under the authority of George V and continued to circulate throughout the transitional months when Edward VIII and later George VI took the throne. Because of this, the 1936 penny represents an extraordinary overlap in royal timelines, a tangible piece of a year unlike any other in British history. The Royal Mint had been preparing to strike coins for Edward VIII, but his insistence that his portrait face left the same direction as his father's broke the centuries-old tradition of alternating directions between monarchs. This disagreement delayed production, and by the time it was resolved, his abdication was imminent. As a result, no Edward VIII pennies entered circulation, leaving the 1936 issue as the last true penny. Of the old king's reign, collectors today value the 1936 penny, not because it is exceedingly rare, but because it stands as the end of a chapter. It is the final heartbeat of a numismatic lineage that began with Queen Victoria's old bronze pennies and evolved through the early 20th century. The bronze penny itself was part of a decimal system established in 1860 that replaced the earlier copper coinage with a more practical and durable metal mix. The Britannia design, which had adorned the reverse since the reign of Charles II, was kept as a symbol of continuity and strength. Through every crisis from war to economic depression, the penny remained an icon of stability and familiarity in the pockets of ordinary Britons. By the 1930s, the penny had become a cornerstone of daily life. It could buy a newspaper, a loaf of bread, or a child's handful of sweets. Its wide use meant that millions of these coins were struck every year. The Royal Mint reported a mintage of over 46 million pennies in 1936, each one carrying the final effigy of George V, his face calm and stately, his image forever frozen in the bronze of empire. Yet beyond its circulation, the 1936 penny carries a sense of nostalgia for a nation on the verge of transformation. The following year, in 1937, new coins bearing the likeness of George VI would be introduced, and with them a new era would begin. The empire was changing industrially, politically, and socially. The Second World War was only 3 years away, and Britain's global role would soon be tested as never before. When you hold a 1936 penny, you are holding more than a coin. You are holding the weight of a turning point in modern British history. You are holding the last breath of a long reigning king, the pause before a nation faced its next storm, the bridge between the Edwardian grace of the early 20th century and the wartime resilience that would soon define a generation. The design itself reflects that mixture of dignity and endurance. The obverse portrait by Bertram McKennell was originally introduced in 1911 and depicts George V in royal robes facing left, surrounded by the Latin legend Gorgives 5, Digra, Brit Rex, Fide Def, NDIMP, meaning George V, by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, defender of the faith, Emperor of India. The reverse by Leonard Charles Wyon shows Britannia seated on a rock holding a trident and shield with the inscription 1 penny, and the date 1936 beneath her feet. This imagery, which had endured for generations, tied together Britain's naval supremacy and its imperial pride. During the mid-1930s, the British economy was recovering from the Great Depression coin production, reflected this gradual improvement as the Royal Mint resumed steady output levels. However, the minting technology was also evolving, presses were becoming more precise, and metal consistency improved, giving coins like the 1936 penny sharper detail and greater durability. Many examples from this year survive in high-grade condition, especially those that were stored in mint rolls or never saw extensive circulation. From a collector's perspective, the 1936 penny occupies a fascinating space. It is not considered rare in the traditional sense, but it is historically irreplaceable. It completes the story of George V's coinage and serves as the missing link before the unissued Edward VIII patterns and the fresh start under George VI. For this reason, sets of British pennies from 1902 to 1936 are often cherished as the full arc of a monarch's reign, ending with the calm dignity of this final date. In modern times, collectors seek 1936 pennies in top condition, with deep chocolate or red-brown patinas. Certified examples graded by major services such as PCGS or NGC, in uncirculated condition, can fetch respectable premiums not for scarcity, but for beauty and historical significance. The coin is often used as an educational tool to explain how numismatic design connects directly to the history of the monarchy and the shifting identity of the nation itself. If we look deeper into the context of 1936, we find that this coin was minted during a time of subtle anxiety. The empire, though vast, was beginning to show cracks. The Irish Free State had left the Commonwealth, the shadow of fascism loomed over Europe, and global economics were unstable. Yet the penny in your hand would have felt reassuringly familiar, a link to everyday normalcy that people could trust. The 1936 penny is a symbol of endurance. It carries the face of a king who led through world conflict and who preserved the stability of his realm. It bridges the past and future of British currency and encapsulates the essence of a nation standing between two worlds, the old empire and the modern age. Imagine holding in your hand a small copper coin that once carried the weight of a fading empire, a coin that passed through the hands of soldiers, poets, and common workers of a nation rebuilding after the Great War, a coin minted in the shadows of change, and yet so easily forgotten. The 1921 1 penny of the United Kingdom is not just a coin, it is a time capsule, a silent witness to a turbulent decade of hope, loss, and transformation. Today we uncover its true story from the mints that crafted it to the hearts of collectors who treasure it a century later. Welcome to the untold history of the 1921 UK penny, a story of art, politics, and power, all engraved in copper. The 1921 1 penny coin of the United Kingdom was struck during a time of great uncertainty and recovery for the British Empire. The First World War had ended only 3 years earlier, and the United Kingdom was still dealing with its aftermath. The cost of the war had drained the economy. Unemployment was rising, and the political landscape was shifting. Yet despite all of this, the Royal Mint continued its mission of producing coinage that represented the stability and continuity of the crown. The penny was one of the most recognized coins of the British monetary system, and in 1921 it carried more symbolic weight than ever before. This coin featured on its obverse the right-facing bust of King George V. The image designed by Bertram McKennell, the Australian sculptor who had created one of the most iconic royal portraits of the early 20th century. His depiction of the king was dignified, strong, and slightly somber, perfectly fitting for a monarch leading his people through the difficulties of post-war Britain. Around the portrait ran the Latin legend, Gorgivs 5 da igra Brit omn rex fid def indiemp, translating to George V, by the grace of God, king of all the Britons, defender of the faith, emperor of India. This inscription reminded citizens of Britain's global reach and the unity of its vast empire, even at a time when cracks were beginning to appear. On the reverse stood Britannia, the personification of Britain herself, seated proudly with her trident and shield designed by Leonard Charles Wyon. The design was already over half a century old by 1921, but it remained timeless, a symbol of naval power, strength, and protection. Britannia faced right toward the sea, watching over the empire. With determination, her shield bore the Union flag, and at her side rested a trident and an olive branch, symbols of strength and peace. The word 1 penny appeared around her, with the date 1921 positioned below her figure. This imagery reminded every citizen that even in times of hardship, Britain's identity endured. The penny of 1921 was struck in bronze, an alloy made up of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, a blend that had been used since 1860. When the bronze coinage replaced the older copper pennies, the coin measured 38 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.45 grams. Its size and feel were substantial, making it one of the most iconic coins in everyday circulation. The Royal Mint produced these coins at its Tower Hill facility in London, although records suggest that smaller batches may have been prepared for testing new minting techniques, which were being refined for higher production efficiency. By 1921, the British currency system was still based on the pre-decimal standard 12 pennies to a shilling, and 20 shillings to a pound. The penny remained the backbone of everyday transactions, from small purchases in shops to wages and fares on trams and buses. The common people saw this coin every day. It bought bread, newspapers, and daily essentials. But behind this ordinary use lay a remarkable history tied to world events and economic transitions. After the Great War, Britain's economy had been shaken. Inflation rose dramatically, and the value of the pound fluctuated. Wages struggled to keep up with rising costs, yet coin production remained vital. The Royal Mint maintained large outputs of bronze coins to replace older worn coins and to support trade within the empire. The 1921 penny was part of this effort, a coin born out of necessity. And tradition collectors and historians later noted that the 1921 penny marked the end of an era. Soon after its mintage, the bronze composition of pennies would undergo review, and technological improvements would change how these coins were struck. While not as rare as some earlier Victorian or Edwardian issues, the 1921 penny holds immense historical value because it represents the interwar transition period and reflects the daily life of millions of citizens who lived in a changing world. In terms of mintages, approximately 120 million pennies were struck in 1921, though exact figures vary across different historical records. Most of these coins were circulated widely throughout Britain and its colonies, meaning few survive. In pristine condition today, finding a 1921 penny in uncirculated or mint state condition is considered a significant achievement for collectors due to its century-old history and the extensive wear most coins experienced through years of use for collectors. The 1921 penny's value depends heavily on its condition. Coins in very fine condition might fetch modest prices, while those in extremely fine or uncirculated grades can command significantly higher values depending on the market and the demand within the numismatic community. Some specimens have been discovered with slight variations in striking details, such as rim thickness or lettering depth, leading researchers to study their origins and production batches in greater depth. The penny also connects to deeper social and cultural stories. In the early 1920s, Britain was adjusting to the loss of so many lives from the war, the rise of new political movements, and the beginning of social reforms. Coins like the 1921 penny circulated. Through these years as silent witnesses, they passed through hands that voted in post-war elections, through factories where labor movements grew stronger, and through homes that were rebuilding families broken by the war. Every penny had its own journey, carrying both monetary and emotional value. As the 1920s continued, the British government began looking toward modernization of its coinage system. Yet the image of Britannia and King George V remained a symbol of unity until the King's death in 1936. The 1921 penny thus sits squarely within this narrative of continuity, resilience, and imperial identity. The craftsmanship of McKennell and Wyon combined two eras of artistry representing both the old Victorian vision of empire and the new modern identity of Britain. The composition of the metal used in 1921, Pennies also tells a fascinating industrial story. The Royal Mint worked closely with metal suppliers to ensure the precise alloy composition because even small deviations could cause problems during striking and circulation. During the early 1920s, there were reports of fluctuations in copper availability as the global metal market adjusted after wartime shortages. This affected not only coinage, but also industries like shipbuilding and electrical manufacturing. The penny, therefore, was a product of both economic necessity and national symbolism. Over time, the 1921 penny gained attention from collectors worldwide, not because of an immediate rarity, but because of its role as a transitional coin from the Great War generation to the Roaring Twenties, a period that defined much of 20th century culture today. Numismatists see this coin as a bridge between history and art, a modest object that connects economic data with human experience. When examined under magnification, the level of craftsmanship becomes evident. The fine details of the king's beard, the precise waves beneath Britannia's feet, and the crisp lettering all demonstrate the skill of engravers and the precision of the mint's equipment. Even after 100 years, many surviving examples retain these details, showing the lasting quality of British minting traditions. The 1921 penny was also part of the circulation across parts of the British Empire, including Ireland until 1928, India, and several colonial territories. British currency served as a standard of stability and trust. Its circulation across continents made it one of the most recognized coin designs in the world. The story of this penny therefore extends far beyond Britain itself, reaching places where the empire's influence was felt from Asia to Africa and the Caribbean as the century turned and Britain underwent decimalization in 1971. The old penny became obsolete, but the 1921 penny and others of its kind never lost their charm. They are now historical artifacts cherished for their artistry and cultural significance in museums and private collections. They remind us of the everyday, people whose lives were shaped by the events of their time. The legacy of the 1921 penny is more than metal and design. It is the embodiment of endurance in an age of uncertainty. It connects us to a moment when Britain was rebuilding, redefining, and rediscovering itself through change and challenge. This small coin stands as a symbol of that journey. Its value lies not only in copper, but in the human stories it silently carried from one generation to another. Imagine holding in your hand a single coin that survived the turn of the century, a coin that carries the power of the British Empire in its copper skin, a coin that witnessed the reign of King Edward fade into memory and the rise of King George. The 1909 one penny of the United Kingdom is not just metal, it is time solidified. It is history captured forever in bronze. It is the last whisper of an era when Britain ruled the seas, when the world's currency echoed with the might of the empire. And when every penny truly mattered in the hands of a worker or a soldier, this small round piece of bronze tells stories of change, revolution, and empire that no textbook can describe. And today, we are going to dive deep into the history, the design, the minting, the controversies, and the legacy of the legendary 1909 UK one penny coin. The story of the 1909 UK one penny begins in the heart of the Royal Mint, a time when the machinery of empire struck not just coins, but identity. It was the year before King George V ascended the throne, and this coin still bore the proud image of King Edward VII, whose reign had marked the modernizing of Britain and the transformation of its coinage. The 1909 penny was struck in bronze, a blend of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, a perfect combination to give durability and shine in circulation. It weighed 9.45 grams and measured 30.8 millimeters in diameter. And like every British penny of its age, it carried symbolism far beyond its material worth. On the obverse, the face of King Edward VII, engraved by George William de Sole, stood as a testament. To the British monarchy, the design showed Edward VII facing right with the Latin inscription Edward Ves Seventh, Dei gra Brit Omen Rex Fid Def and IMP, translating to Edward VII by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, defender of the faith, Emperor of India. Every letter on that edge carried pride, power, and tradition. On the reverse stood Britannia, seated proudly holding a trident in her left hand and a shield resting at her side, the Union Jack gleaming under her arm. This image, designed by Leonard Charles Wyon, represented the enduring strength of Britain's naval dominance and the unity of the kingdom. Britannia's presence on the penny was more than artistic. It was a declaration that Britain's reach was global and her empire eternal. The year 1909 itself was one of quiet tension across the empire. While the coin's design remained unchanged, the nation around it was shifting. New ideas of labor, rights, suffrage, and international politics were brewing. The British working class was beginning to find its voice, and each penny mattered in the economy of the people. A single penny could buy a loaf of bread or a ride on the tram. It carried weight in the pockets of millions across Britain and its colonies. The coin passed through the hands of dock workers, miners, schoolchildren, and merchants, each adding invisible fingerprints of human history to its surface. Production of the 1909 penny took place at the Royal Mint in London, but also in other branch mints such as Heaton in Birmingham, marked by the tiny H mint mark beneath the date. This small detail often separates an ordinary 1909 penny from a highly sought-after collector's piece. The 1909 H penny struck at the Heaton Mint is particularly significant for numismatists because it represented one of the final issues before the passing of Edward VII in May 1910, thus bridging two reigns within a single design series. When we examine the rarity, the 1909 penny without mint mark was produced in large quantities, around 2 million pieces, while the 1909 H variety was minted in smaller numbers, around 5.4 million. Yet survival rates are far lower due to circulation wear and later coinage recalls. This scarcity, especially in high grades, makes the 1909 penny a treasured piece among collectors today. Examples in uncirculated condition can command significant value, especially those with full mint luster and sharp detail across Britannia's shield and King Edward's portrait. From a metallurgical standpoint, the 1909 penny represents the culmination of Victorian and Edwardian minting technology. The bronze alloy was carefully measured to ensure uniform conductivity and hardness. Each blank was punched, weighed, and inspected before being struck by steam-powered presses. The Royal Mint's precision in this era was world-renowned. Their coins circulated from London to Delhi to Cape Town and beyond, bringing with them a shared identity under the British crown. In the social context, the 1909 penny was more than an economic tool. It was part of a global symbol system. Coins were used to express loyalty, legitimacy, and continuity in the empire. When people in India, Australia, or Canada used pennies bearing the image of Edward VII, they were reminded of imperial authority but also of the unity under one sovereign head. The coin served as propaganda in metal, art, and power intertwined. The historical transition from Edward VII to George V the following year added emotional and collectible value to the 1909 penny. It became the last of its kind under Edward's rule, before the portrait of his son would take its place in 1911. The Edwardian penny series thus ended with dignity, its bronze composition capturing an age of refinement, innovation, and imperial stability. Before the turbulence of World War I changed everything for collectors. Today, the 1909 UK penny is more than a numismatic artifact. It is a story you can hold in your hand. Each surviving piece tells a slightly different story. Some bear signs of shipboard use in the Navy. Some might have traveled in a soldier's pocket to the far colonies. Others may have been part of daily trade in the bustling markets of London or Liverpool. Each mark and scratch is history engraved by time. When we look deeper into its design details, we see artistry that modern minting sometimes lacks: the bold lettering, the symmetry of Britannia's seated figure, the rhythmic spacing between the words all reflect the craftsmanship of hand-engraved dies. The striking pressure and planche preparation produced subtle variations that today help experts identify original dies and strike quality under magnification. One can see micro-grain lines showing the metal flow during impact, a visual fingerprint, unique to each coin struck in that year. The 1909 penny also stands at an intersection between art and science. During this period, the Royal Mint began experimenting with more standardized minting processes, mechanical precision was becoming key, and quality control systems were introduced, including weighbridge testing and metal composition analysis. The result was consistency and longevity that ensured the penny could circulate for decades. Some 1909 pennies remained in circulation. Well, into the 1940s testament to the durability of British bronze coinage. The cultural importance of the penny extended into language and literature idioms like "a penny for your thoughts" or "a bad penny always turns up" show how deeply embedded this coin was in British society. It was both a unit of value and a symbol of everyday life, and by 1909 that symbolism had stretched across continents in the colonies. Children played with pennies. Traders stacked them in rows and soldiers saved them as reminders of home. Now let us explore its legacy in modern numismatics. Today, the 1909 UK 1 penny stands as a transitional coin. It represents the twilight of Edwardian Britain and the dawn of a new age for collectors. It is the bridge between old world engraving and the coming industrial precision of the 20th century. Market values vary, depending on condition and rarity, but a pristine, uncirculated 1909 H penny can reach hundreds of dollars in auction, sometimes more if provenanced, or certified by reputable grading services like PCGS or NGC. Coin enthusiasts often pursue full-date sets of Edward VII pennies from 1902 to 1910, with 1909 as a critical piece due to its historical timing. Beyond its financial worth, the emotional connection to such a coin cannot be overstated. Every collector who holds a 1909 penny holds a fragment of an empire, an echo of the steam age, the Industrial Revolution, and the might of British craftsmanship. It connects past and present. It connects empire and individual. It connects stories of millions whose lives pass through the same economic heartbeat, symbolized by that humble bronze disc. So the next time you see a 1909 UK penny, do not see it as just an old coin. See it as a survivor of a vanished world, a tiny portal into history that still whispers tales of kings, ships' workers, and dreams forged in bronze beneath the hammer of the Royal Mint. It is the coin that stood at the edge of 2 centuries, the last breath of Edwardian elegance and the first echo of modern Britain. In a world where every coin tells a story of kings and empires, of wars and revolutions, of craftsmanship and hidden secrets, one coin stands quietly in the shadow of time, yet carries the echo of a dying empire and the dawn of modern Britain. This is the story of the 1906 UK penny, a simple copper disc that holds inside it a century of change, blood, sweat, industry, and royal pride. In the early years of the 20th century, Britain stood as the most powerful empire on earth. Its currency dominated global trade, and the penny was the beating heart of its coinage system. In 1906, a single coin struck from bronze would become more than a unit of money. It would become a snapshot of an era, the 1906 UK penny minted during the reign of King Edward. The 7th represents not only British industry, but also the elegance of Victorian legacy transitioning into the modern age. Edward VII, the son of Queen Victoria, had ascended to the throne in 1901, and his image was one of refinement and sophistication. The design of the 1906 penny reflected this new direction, a portrait of the king facing right engraved by George William de Saulles, who was one of the finest engravers of the Royal Mint. The portrait was dignified, yet human showing. The monarch with a touch of realism never seen before in previous designs. His short beard and calm expression reflected stability and the confidence of an empire at its height. The reverse of the coin carried one of Britain's most enduring symbols. Britannia seated beside her trident and shield facing right towards the horizon. Britannia represented maritime dominance, unity, and the protection of the British Isles. For centuries she had appeared on the penny, and by 1906 she had become not just a design but a national emblem. Every detail of Britannia was deeply symbolic. The flowing robe represented purity, the shield bearing the Union flag symbolized defense of the realm, and the trident reminded the world that Britain ruled the seas. The 1906 penny was struck in bronze composed of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, a material chosen for both durability and workability. The coin measured 38 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.4 grams. It was a sturdy coin meant to circulate widely among everyday people, from factory workers and farmers to soldiers and merchants across Britain and its colonies. Each penny passed through thousands of hands carrying the sweat of labor and the stories of families during an age of rapid transformation. The early 1900s were marked by innovation, industrial power, and the beginnings of social change. In 1906, Britain was witnessing political shifts, with the Liberal Party coming into power led by Henry Campbell Bannerman, and reforms being introduced that would shape the welfare state. The coin thus circulated during a time when Britain was redefining itself from an empire of conquest to a society of modern governance. Every 1906 penny that exchanged hands was part of that transformation, in terms of production. The 1906 penny was minted at the Royal Mint in London, under strict quality controls. The minting process involved multiple steps, starting with the creation of coin blanks cut from rolled bronze sheets. These blanks were annealed to soften the metal and then cleaned in acid before being struck under immense pressure between two engraved dies. The obverse die bore the portrait of King Edward VII, while the reverse carried Britannia. The precision of these dies and the skill of the engravers ensured that even mass-produced coins carried remarkable detail. Collectors today can still admire the fine texture of the king's hair and the intricate folds of Britannia's robe. The total mintage of the 1906 penny was approximately 47 million pieces, a substantial number that made it one of the more common issues of the Edwardian series. Yet despite its abundance, it remains highly collectible because of its historical importance. Coins of this era were not only used in Britain but also across the vast British Empire, from India and Australia to Canada and Africa, where the British monetary system influenced local economies in every colony. The penny was more than currency. It was a reminder of British authority and connection to the crown. No. Imagine life in 1906, the streets of London bustling with carriages and early motor cars, the air filled with smoke from coal fires, the news filled with talk of the empire's achievements. The penny jingled in the pockets of bakers, shopkeepers, and schoolchildren. It could buy a loaf of bread or a pint of milk. It could be saved for a week to purchase a newspaper or a train ticket. It represented the rhythm of daily life and the trust in the monarch's image that guaranteed its value over time. The 1906 penny began to witness major world events. It circulated through the last years of Edward's reign and into that of his successor, George V. It was spent during the years leading to the First World War. It passed through the hands of soldiers, their families, and merchants during one of history's most devastating conflicts. After the war, many pennies from the Edwardian era were worn down or withdrawn, yet some survived, kept as keepsakes in drawers and jars, symbols of an older, simpler Britain. Numismatically, the 1906 penny marks an important point in the evolution of British coinage. Collectors prize it, not for rarity, but for representation. It captures a transition from the Victorian design tradition to the modern style that would later define the George V and VI series. High-grade examples, particularly those with full detail and original luster, are highly valued by numismatists. Coins struck in brilliant uncirculated condition showcase the craftsmanship of the Royal Mint at its finest, with sharp edges and deep bronze tones that glow with age. There are also interesting varieties among the 1906 pennies. Subtle differences in the strike, the positioning of the lettering, and the texture of the metal can distinguish one coin from another. Some specimens show slight doubling on the lettering, others display small die cracks or misaligned strikes, making them desirable among variety collectors. One particular detail that experts look for is the clarity of the rim and the evenness of the fields, which indicates how well the coin was struck and how well it has been preserved over more than a century. Beyond its physical characteristics, the 1906 penny is a tangible link to King Edward VII himself, known as the Peacemaker. Edward was a monarch who modernized the British monarchy. His reign, though short, was marked by charm, diplomacy, and cultural revival. Under his rule, Britain enjoyed relative peace, prosperity, and a golden age of social progress. The 1906 penny therefore carries his legacy in metal. The calm expression of the king on the coin contrasts with the turbulence that the world would soon face in the years after his death as the 20th century moved forward and the monarchy passed from Edward to George and then to the Windsors. The old bronze pennies continued to circulate well into the mid-century, but by the time of decimalization in 1971, the pre-decimal penny was finally withdrawn from circulation, marking the end of over 1,000 years of penny history. Today, the 1906 penny is more than a collectible. It is a piece of the British soul, a relic of an empire that once stretched across the globe, a whisper from a time when the world was changing, but still held to tradition. For coin collectors and historians, the 1906 penny tells a story of craftsmanship, empire, and endurance. Each surviving example carries its own journey from the mint to the markets across decades of hands and generations of lives. It connects the modern collector to the workers who earned it, the monarch who authorized it, and the engraver who designed it. It is a piece of history that still breathes today. And so when you hold a 1906 UK penny in your hand, you are not holding just a coin. You are holding a moment, a memory, a nation's pride pressed into bronze, a coin that survived wars, peace, industrial revolutions, and royal successions. Its color may have faded, but its story glows brighter than ever.